guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "Neighbor Sawed My Garage in Half After Claiming My Property Belongs to Him." It sounds crazy to say that a building could be sawed in half, right? Right. I did not even know that it was physically possible until my neighbor sawed our garage in half after a disagreement about the boundary line between the two properties. The story goes like this. I have lived in the Boston area all of my life, as I was born and raised here. My childhood home was about 10 minutes outside of Boston in the suburbs, and I had moved out after I married my wonderful wife, Lisa. I frequently visited my parents at my childhood home, and after all these years still kept a friendly relationship with the neighbors, the Johnstons. After my mom passed away a few years ago, my wife and I, along with our only son, visited my dad as much as we could. It was a beautiful house with a big yard and a detached garage, and the thought of my dad being alone in such a big, beautiful house made me quite sad. The neighbors also visited him frequently, and everyone in the neighborhood loved my dad. We had never had any problems in all my time in the area, especially not from the Johnstons next door. This all changed shortly after my dad passed away. I ended up inheriting the house, and my wife and I moved back into my childhood home with our son. Our relationship with the Johnstons was fine, until my dad passed away. I thought this was strange, because I had known the Johnstons since I was a child, and even my wife was on a friendly level with them. She had met them several times while we had visited my dad when he was alive, so I was not very sure where the tension was coming from. The tension had only escalated when my son put down a bag of wood chips in the yard, which went over the boundary line between our house and the Johnstons' house. Since my dad had remodeled the home after I moved out and added another small garage, I guess that this redetermined the boundary line in some way between the two houses. We had made the decision to clean up the yard a bit after we had moved in. My dad kept the house and yard well maintained, but it had been several weeks since his passing and the backyard could have used some love. We had put the wood chips down to clear space so a landscaper truck would have enough room to move around our yard, so that we could clean up some of the trees and bushes that had been overgrowing in the last several weeks. The Johnstons did not like this, because shortly after they had patted a wood stake in the ground where the wood chips had been placed. It was like they were marking the edge of their property, and our suspicions of this were confirmed when they came over to talk to us about it. Mr. Johnston had told us, "Come get your stuff out of our yard. This is our property." I was honestly taken back by this, because as far as I knew, the wood chips were not crossing property line. We did not have any formal fence around either property, so this only confused things. Besides that, even if we were crossing boundary lines, was a couple of bags of wood chips really that big of a deal? I had never heard of the Johnstons acting this way when my father was alive, and I had also never experienced it myself. They were known to be quite friendly neighbors. Well, this ended up getting blown out of proportion, and the Johnstons brought in official land surveyors to determine where the official property lines laid. Well, this ended up not working out in our favor, which I was a bit ridiculous. The land surveyors had determined that the property line split up right smack dab in the middle of the new garage. This meant that technically, our garage was overhanging their boundary line. My first question was, if this was the case, how did someone not catch it while the garage was being added? Did they just put the garage there and not question it? But I also could not help but wonder why now all of a sudden this was a problem. I could tell that the Johnstons, Mr. J in particular, were satisfied that part of the garage was past our property line. The garage had been there for at least 5 years, and I wondered why now it was a problem. I cannot say enough how much they had seemed to love my dad, so taking strikes against his beloved property now seemed odd. Things got even more odd after this discovery. A couple days later, I was at work and my wife was out with her sister while my son was at school. This meant that there was no one home for most of the day. My neighbor saw this to his advantage and sawed my garage in half. Yes, you read that right. My neighbor sawed our garage in half. Upon investigation, it turns out that Mr. Johnston used his construction skills to take a sawzall to our garage and saw down the half that was technically on his property. He then took all the remains of the garage and dumped it in our yard, creating a giant mess all over the work we had done. My first reaction was of course to call the police and file a report. I mean, I knew tensions had been high between us over this property line dispute, but I did not think it would go this far. Hell, I did not even know it was possible to saw a garage in half. After this, my wife and I had refused to talk to the Johnstons out of fear of safety for our family. If the guy could saw a garage in half, what else could he do? We then gathered enough information and evidence, we have security camera and got Mr. Johnston in the act, and filed a lawsuit against our neighbors in the Supreme Court. Luckily, my wife and I had a decent income and were able to afford some really good lawyers. However, the Johnstons surprised me yet again as they decided to represent themselves. In court, Mr. Johnston described us as awful neighbors who revved our car engines in the middle of the night and were rude to everyone else in the neighborhood. This was obviously not true. We were nice people, and we were also respectful to everyone in the neighborhood, including the Johnstons. This did not work out for them, because in the end the Johnstons had to pay us $150,000 for the mess they had caused. The money would replace our garage and repair any of the grass or ground around it. It would also cover the costs of removing all of the debris from our yard and replacing items that were in our garage that were damaged in the dispute, such as our washer and dryer. The judge also ordered that the Johnstons were not allowed to step on our property for any reason, and even sent out several more land surveyors so that the court could determine where the property line was. While the surveyors the Johnstons had hired had set the property line in their favor, the judge ruled that the property line had never actually changed, meaning that our garage was never actually overhanging their yard. The whole situation is still wild to me, and till this day I still do not know why the wood chips caused such a big mess. The next story is titled, "Landlord Kicked Me Out of an Apartment I Already Paid For." Connecticut. I contacted my landlord a while back to inform him that I would be out of the country when my lease expires at the end of June, and I do not intend to renew because I'm starting a new job in a different city when I get back. I asked if it were possible to bump my move-out date up, sublet the apartment, or find any other compromise that would benefit us both. He refused my suggestions, saying he had to stick to the terms of the original agreement and would not compromise. So, I went and found another apartment and just resolved myself to paying 2 rents for the month of June. I told him when I planned to move out and followed through, leaving only a few belongings in the apartment, which I intended to go back for before the end of the month and relocate to a storage facility. Why not? If I'm gonna be paying for the apartment anyway, I might as well use it, right? Anyway, my landlord never informed the board. It's a condominium complex consisting mostly of nosy old ladies who really don't like fact that some people rent their units out to millennials, of my plans. Apparently, there's a whole host of move-out related policies which I may have violated, and my landlord got slammed with a bunch of fines including a hefty unauthorized move-out fee. According to the bylaws, owners are supposed to notify the board, who then coordinate the move-out with building management, which obviously never happened. My landlord left me a furious voicemail while I was at work earlier today and followed up with an email claiming I had violated the lease, my tenancy is terminated, he's calling the cops, and that I must forfeit the keys immediately. I have not contacted him back yet. What should I do now? I've already paid for the month in its entirety and he's holding a rather large security deposit. Am I not allowed to retrieve my belongings from an apartment I've already paid for? Can he refuse to give me back my security deposit? TLDR. My landlord terminated my tenancy prior to the end of the lease, due in part to negligence on his end. He has my security deposit and some of my belongings. What are my options? Update. This past week my landlord terminated my lease less than 24 hours after he deposited my rent check for the month, which was on time, by the way. I showed up this morning to gather the last of my belongings, patch the holes from my artwork, and clean the bathroom, only to find he had changed the locks on my door. I called him and asked what was going on, since my understanding was that there is a formal eviction process that needs to occur before a landlord can deny you access to your apartment. He got pretty nasty on the phone, threatened me by saying, "If you step foot on the property, it'll be the last thing you ever do," and claimed I had destroyed the place. I had maybe half a dozen small nails left in the walls that I couldn't pry out with my fingers last weekend. I told him I was going to the police and that if he didn't let me in, I was hiring a locksmith to drill out the lock on the door, to which he responded, "If you do that, you're gonna pay," and not in a tone that implied financially paying for it. So, I filed a complaint at the station, and they sent an officer to take my account. She was super nice and basically confirmed what I already knew. That landlords cannot illegally lock you out of an apartment without a formal eviction notice, nor can they enter the premises without due cause and sufficient warning. She spoke with him on the phone, and he started arguing with her. She ended up cutting him off and basically said, I'm paraphrasing, either you come here to give the keys to your tenant, or I'm going to come find you, put you in handcuffs, and pry them out of your hands before taking you to jail. I'm not gonna lie, that was extremely satisfying to hear. He came over and managed to intercept me in the parking lot as I was retrieving something from my car. The cop was not present. He started acting all buddy-buddy. Man, I'm not trying to screw anyone over. Are we going to be civil about this? I don't mean you any harm. I thought you abandoned the place. Which is total BS because not only did I tell him, in writing, exactly what I planned on doing, but I still had a substantial amount of possessions in the apartment. I said, I'm not trying to screw anyone over either. I just want my stuff. I've been trying to be civil with you, but you made it criminal the minute you illegally entered my apartment and changed my locks. Let's head upstairs, let me do what I need to do, and then you can do whatever you want with the apartment. He kept resisting and stalling, because he knew the cop was up there waiting, but finally relented. Turns out he had already patched the holes and cleaned the place, probably to try double dipping on the rent, and moved all of my stuff, except for my AC, into storage. It looked like he might have been preparing to make some much-needed improvements to the unit, since nothing had been updated in 50 years, probably expecting to use my 2-month security deposit as funds. After a bit of negotiating, I got him to reluctantly sign an agreement stating he would return my full security deposit after I reimburse him for any condo fees he might incur from my move. I figured this was a decent compromise that would avoid us having to go to court. I ended up getting my stuff back as well. Are there any further steps I should take to ensure a favorable outcome? I plan on writing down a transcript of the events today and sending the officer a letter of thanks. I've also considered contacting the board to apologize for breaking any rules and explaining that I wasn't aware at the time. TLDR. Landlord relented after the police threatened to put him in the slammer. I got my stuff back and I expect to get a full refund on my security deposit. It was a good day. The last story is titled, Can I be blocked from my apartment's parking lot? New Hampshire. I live in Apartment B. Parking Lot B is owned by the apartment complex. Apartment A is an entirely separate complex with their own lot, Parking Lot A, managed by a different company. The road passing by Lot A and going to Lot B is the only entrance/exit from Lot B, as the surrounding area is woods. Yesterday, I arrived home to find that the road was gone. It had been torn up and there were traffic cones blocking it. I had to park about 2 blocks away from my apartment and walk half a mile on a dirt path to get into my home. Lot B was not touched, but Lot A was also torn up. From what I can gather, this was planned road maintenance by the owners of Apartment A. However, for those of us living in Apartment B, our only entrance/exit from our parking lot has been removed without any warning. A parking space is guaranteed in my lease for Apartment B. Can Apartment A legally do this? Is there anything that I can do about it other than complain to Apartment B management? Other people living in B aren't able to go to work because their cars are stuck in the lot, and the lot is normally a school bus stop, but the bus can't get in either. I know this is a mild annoyance for me right now, but it could easily turn into a big issue. Update. I spoke to the management of Apartment B. They had no warning this was happening from Apartment A, and the management companies are going to hash it out. I was told that I should not be blocked from my apartment, and they had no reason to block off access completely. Apparently, an official memo from B's management is going to go out to B residents today, so I'll update again when I have that. This is probably going to get resolved as far as I actually care really quickly, but I figure people here are interested enough for the updates. Update 2. Since I posted this, I had the attitude of screw it and started driving on the dirt road to park in B's lot anyways. However, someone at A has now posted up signs around the dirt warning pass at own risk. It's a really bumpy road, so now I am worried about damaging my car. Does this sign actually absolve them of any liability if my car does get damaged? Or if I do park on the street and hurt myself walking down the road to actually enter my apartment, would Apartment A have any liability then? Update 3. So, I posted before about losing access to my apartment parking lot because another apartment had decided to tear up the only street leading to it. They removed the physical cones from the road and instead put up a sign saying pass at own risk. I don't believe that actually absolves them of liability, but my car hasn't been damaged by driving over the dirt. Then yesterday, I got home to find them actively paving the street at 6 p.m. I had to park 2 blocks away from my apartment again and walk along a steep grassy hill and part of the newly paved road, still warm and sticking to my shoes a bit. In heels, but that was my own silly fault. There were vehicles at both ends of the road blocking people from entering or leaving the parking lot. Edit. This was not related to the construction. It turns out some whole friends of my downstairs neighbors were banging on their windows while drunk and/or high, and half asleep me heard it as hammering. Still a shitty situation for me, but nothing to blame the road crew for. I know that all I have is a bunch of hypotheticals and no real damages, so I can't do anything. At the same time, this is extremely frustrating and seems shady as hell. Final update. The road has been fully paved, and it looks like the workers are gone. I'm sure people here would like a story about how the fire marshal swooped in and saved the day, but reality is boring. They finished their work and left, still without telling the apartment residents anything. Thanks for listening.